Good evening and a warm welcome back to another session that is under the series of Meeting an Expert, where we talk about a lot of topics and for so many experiences, and on top of that, sharing passionate learning. So, to start with today's session, may I invite our chairman to share his expressions and wishes. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushali. First of all, considering the current situation, banking sector is quite vital and important sector for everybody. So therefore, in spite of all these priorities and the necessities, we have a guest speaker today, CEO of Standard Chartered Bank. So in spite of a busy schedule, he decided to be with us for the benefit of APIT student population. Very warmly welcome you on behalf of our CEO, Roshane Godegi, our directors, board of directors, our teachers, our students, and all the viewers. On behalf of them, I would like to very warmly welcome you, Bingu. We call Bingu actually, is much better. Mr. Bingumal, Thewarathanthri, as the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank for this important webinar. In fact, APIT, known for quality education, and whoever who join APIT is basically leaving as the sort of a good academic. So we are in the journey. That we want to give everybody some sort of extracurricular activities who is leaving APIT. That is more on the leadership. We want everyone to be the leaders in this society when they are leaving APIT. So that is the whole objective Dr. Rohantha initiated, to bring all the CEOs to this forum and give the opportunity our student population to have a direct intervention and interaction with the CEOs like your caliber, Bindu. So basically, Bingu, why we are invited is to get the right experience, right exposure for our students. So that means you are doing a CSR campaign, CSR thing, because you have come up to your corporate ladder. So you are there to share your experience for the betterment of students. So therefore, I would like to thank you and also warmly welcome you to the important moment and the webinar. So I request all my students to get the maximum out of Mr. Bingumal from his experience and whatever the knowledge pool or knowledge or the ability he has. So we have given that direct interaction in between you and Bingu and with our students. So without further ado, while thanking Dr. Rohantha for initiative, I will hand over the session back to Kaushali and Dr. Rohantha. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And let me introduce our guest speaker for today, Bingumal Thewarathanthri, Chief Executive Officer, Standard Chartered Bank, Sri Lanka. Bingumal, better known as Bingu, was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Standard Chartered Bank, Sri Lanka on the 1st of January 2019. He is the first Sri Lankan national to be appointed to the position. Apart from his role as CEO, Bingu also heads Sri Lanka's commercial, corporate and institutional banking CCIB business. Having joined Standard Chartered in July 2004, Bingu counts on more than 25 years of experience within the banking and finance industry. During his tenure at Standard Chartered, he has held several leading positions in Sri Lanka and Africa, including the role of head transaction banking in Mauritius, where he was responsible for setting up the transaction banking business for franchise. He was also responsible for setting up the financial institutions booking center for Africa and managed investments going into the sub-Saharan Africa via the Mauritius Securities Services Hub. Prior to his appointment as CEO, Bingu headed the retail banking business in Sri Lanka. Bingu holds an MBA from the University of Wales, UK. Sir, over to you.
Thanks, Rohantha, for that introduction, and thanks, Bandula, for having me at APIT. Really excited to talk to the students. I believe the session is live, so many students must be joining on social media as well. So what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of how we have approached the pandemic starting early next year, and the first and the second wave, and now we're in a third wave. and what we are doing as a bank locally as well as globally to manage this situation and come out of this situation, and also zoom it a little bit to Sri Lanka and to understand when Sri Lanka will come out of it and some of the challenges we have and also the opportunities. So I would like to go to my presentation just to give you an overview of how we have managed it. Let's go to the slide number 2. So when the pandemic hit, that was March last year. I mean, we didn't have any exposure to a pandemic at that point. So it started from China, of course, one of our footprint markets, then the Hong Kong, that patch, and eventually it came to Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka went into a harsh lockdown, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in April. And it went on till late March, early April, went on till 11th of May last year. And we had a situation where some of our apparel manufacturers had to stop their production, and the orders were stopped by the buyers. So we had basically a frozen period when it comes to business as an export-oriented bank. We experienced significant challenges in our portfolios. So our focus was only two, looking after our clients and colleagues. And I'll start with the colleagues. So in terms of making sure that they are provided enough support in terms of data connectivity and laptops and things like that, we managed to move a significant part of the business to work from home. Even in April, I think we only had like 20 plus people in office. So we were well equipped compared to other banks in terms of having laptops and things like that. We only had few people in the call center and few people at the trade counters during the curfew period. It was a curfew at that point, not even a typical lockdown. So that's on that side. So people started, getting used to this whole new thing about working from home. But on the client side, I mean, central bank also came up with, moratorium guidelines. We of course participated on those on the retail side as well as on the corporate side. But what was interesting was, bank came up with a $1 billion COVID fund. The bank basically said, we will give money at cost if a particular client is supporting to battle COVID, and if they're moving their manufacturing line to do something against COVID. So be it PPEs, be it health-related, pharma-related industries. If a client is moving into those areas, the bank said we are putting $1 billion on the table. So Sri Lanka is one of the first markets actually to access that $1 billion fund, and we managed to give it to our the top apparel clients like MS, Brandix, all of these names are in the public domain. So it was a really good experience for us and for the clients as well. So on our side, going beyond the moratoriums that government has recommended, also we managed to get some funding and to give it to the community. So we were one of the first banks to actually donate close to $500,000. And we at that point we invested that money in the PCR tests. So we were the people, us and another multinational got involved, and we managed to secure a significant amount of test kits for the airport at that time. So that was the need when we opened the airport somewhere in May, June. The need was like, how do we do the PCR tests at the airports? And so we managed to support that as well, apart from the personal contributions that, the colleagues have done towards some of the local hospitals. If I go into the next slide, so that was the first wave. And the second wave, I would say we didn't really feel it. It was a partial lockdown. We brought down the numbers again. I think we bounced back pretty fast. And that cluster came to some amount of control by December. Sri Lanka had a near normal setup by March. That's the reality. Compared to a lot of the other markets, Sri Lanka did really well till March until the third wave happened. So looking at these waves and the variants and multiple challenges we have, we've come up with plans, and also we've identified the trends in the global economy with the so-called new normal. I personally call it a better normal because we are tired of the new normal. There are some good things about the new normal. I think very clearly we need a better normal. We are also tired of being locked in, and then these partial lockdowns are really not helpful for the communities. So what we've seen is like, there's a big change in the global, behavior in terms of how people buy. The buying behavior has changed. We have clearly seen people are moving into more, the retail spends have gone into digital for sure. Online, the e-commerce have picked up. I'm sure we all know about those. But interestingly, for our sectors, like the apparel sector in Sri Lanka, we've seen the casual wear picking up in a big way. People are buying more clothing for comfortable clothing. and more spends on pharma as well as on the digital space, laptops and things like that. Leisure, I mean, after the second, third pandemic, we've seen, even after the second wave in the Europe, we've seen the travel between Europe and UK picked up, and again they stopped. But now what we see is with US vaccinating more than 300 people, and that economy is bouncing back. And China, anyway, before that, China had very low numbers, and even today, China has a record low number. And also in terms of vaccination, they have now vaccinated more than 500 million people, I think it's close to 700 now, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a very clear-cut China-led growth with US joining. Two big engines firing, and we have seen leisure bouncing back on the travel, bouncing back on the leisure side. Now, having said that, to markets like Sri Lanka and Thailand, because the situation we are in, we have our own challenges right now. But we are of the view that, at least by Q1 next year, the travel will bounce back to even our markets. Working from home, I explained, as a bank, we have taken a stance to take it to the next level by offering something called new ways of working. Most of our colleagues from the recent surveys that we've done, the outcome is like more than 80% of the colleagues are saying they would like the hybrid working model. So hybrid means like you maybe go 1 day to office for a week, 1 or 2 days, 3 days from home. And that also, they would prefer to work in a particular branch office close to home. So it's all about staying close to clients, staying close to home, not staying close to office. So that's a global trend we've seen. Many Fortune 500 companies are, embracing this change. Having said that, too much of Zoom is also bad. So there are a lot of research done on, being on Zoom for hours and hours. So we are trying to reduce the amount of virtual calls that we do. And we want to make it a better experience after, this third wave is over. Green is the new color. Green is a way to the recovery. I'm sure you heard about net zero and the challenges on the the climate risk. The governments, as well as, more importantly, the corporates, I think, looking at climate change as a big challenge, as well as big opportunity as well. So we see a lot of the investors from the investor segment side moving their flows into green bonds, green financing, and they're basically saying if it's not sustainable, we don't want to put our money behind it. So we see green as a color of recovery, and I think also people also realized with what we've seen with the Himalaya appearing after years and years, and I'm sure we've experienced fresh water in the Kali River. We all understood that it's time that we do something. Digital, what we learned in the last 1 year, the companies that had some kind of a digital proposition, be it transacting, be it selling, I think those companies have taken the advantage during the pandemic. They have taken market share very clearly. You can see that in the banking sector as well. So the banks that had some kind of a mobile app, a reasonable mobile app, had taken the payment volumes, while some of the other banks were trying to catch up. You can see that locally as well as globally. Even on the retail side, like I explained, on the buying behavior, you can clearly see corporates that had a reasonable digital platform had done really well. So Industry 4.0, fourth industrial revolution, is something that we were talking about in the last 2-3 years. We believe that it will accelerate further and take the lead in terms of technologies like AI, big data, IoTs. We'll go to the next level, because we've learned that we can do so much with the involvement of data and technology around us. So it's time that accelerate on Industry 4.0. Of course, these crises also had given opportunities for the entrepreneurs, and we have seen series of new clients joining the corporate pool. So one thing also that we've seen is a disruption in the supply chain. With the pandemic, suddenly your market will go down. They will close the market for a couple of months or a couple of weeks. So suddenly your raw material is now impacted. You go to another market. So companies have moved from just-in-time inventories to just-in-case inventories. That's our experience in the last 1.5 years. And the supply chain is completely disrupted. With that, what has happened is also countries have gone into a little bit of retraction. In terms of globalization, and every country is trying to manufacture whatever they can, trying to grow whatever they can. With that, we've seen new set of clients getting into the corporate pool globally. So we really want to help those clients as well. So some of the trends that we've seen, reshaping our economies across our footprint over 70 markets, predominantly in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And a lot of these markets we call home. We've been there for more than 150 years. So if I go to the next slide, I can show you what Standard Chartered Bank had been doing and what we are planning to do. And so we've been doing research from last year in terms of, our expectation was, so our view was this pandemic will stay at least for another, this was last year, November, December. We expected the pandemic to be there at least for the next 1 to 2 years. So our expectation was always the economy is to bounce back by 2022. So with that, we looked at the segments that we can work on. We looked at the larger purpose of the bank, driving commerce and prosperity across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. We realized that since GFC, global financial crisis, world has not got a better place. So in the last 10 years, things have gone from bad to worse. And we've realized that there's a massive amount of inequality, massive amount of carbon emission in our markets, massive amount of not supporting the SMEs. Not enough lack of support for SMEs, a huge issue there. And also all these new companies joining the pools. What do we do about it? So we are taking a stand. So we came up with 3 stands. One is accelerating zero. This is nothing but supporting our clients to achieve net zero in our footprint markets, because we believe that some of the markets like Asia and Africa, there are a lot of brown industries, a lot of industries using fossil fuels. So we are supporting these clients to move from brown to green. It's a path that we have to take. Not everything will happen overnight, but we are taking a stand. It's a 5-year strategy. So accelerating zero is one of the biggest agenda for Standard Chartered Bank. We are completely moved away from fossil fuel financing. We expect our clients to move away from using fossil fuel by 2030, and we are set to support net zero agenda by 2050. Lifting participation is another area that we've identified in our footprint markets. More than 50% of our economies are SMEs. And with these SMEs, there are small and also micro industries, and there's a large population of women-led businesses as well. Not enough support from the banking sector, because what we believe in Standard Chartered is money can be a force for good. Also, we really want to help 1 billion people in terms of impacting 1 billion people in our footprint markets. So we are going on a drive to support the SMEs and also getting into microfinancing through partnerships. Even SMEs we might do through partnerships, because we believe that you cannot do everything on your own. So lifting participation is another big agenda and a stand that we've taken. The other one is the resetting globalization. So resetting globalization is what I explained a little bit in my previous slide. In terms with the disruption of supply chain, we see new entrants into the supply chain, new players joining the global supply chain. So we as a global bank, we have to help them to reach the global markets. How do we get clients go to get close to the buyers? How do we position their products to be suitable for the global market? How do we make sure that these corporates, mid-sized corporates, understand the global governance? How do we make sure that they follow ESG guidelines? So there's a massive job for a bank like us to do. We thought resetting globalization is a stand that we should take. So 3 stands, very clearly aligned to the core of our strategy, core of our purpose, and building a larger purpose-led organization for our footprint markets. So this is what Standard Chartered had been doing in the last 6 months after a lot of research. We just launched, we call it the Chapter 3. We just launched it, and in the process of looking at different initiatives in our footprint markets. The leadership teams are busy identifying opportunities as well as areas to focus on. And under these, we have separate. I will not go into details. There are strategic pillars under the stands. Also, there are 3 enablers. One enabler is the new ways of working, what I explained. Of course, there's people and culture, and digital and innovation is another enabler. So those are 3 enablers. But very clearly, there are 4 strategic pillars as well. At this point, I don't want to discuss. But Standard Chartered very clearly is not going back to the past. Very clearly, we want to see the world is changing for a better world, to be a better place for people to live and to do business, and we want to be part of that journey. If I move into the next slide. Yeah, I think that last slide is around Sri Lanka. So everybody's, I think most of our base here is, I believe, Sri Lankans. We have few overseas participants also joining, but Sri Lanka's economy had been a discussion point since we were downgraded to a triple C. Some people were very anxious, closely monitoring Sri Lanka's situation. So as a global bank, what I would like to say is like, we've been in these markets for more than 150 years, and we've seen these situations in multiple markets. Specifically on Sri Lanka, we've seen debt to GDP rising above 100% in the past. The only difference at that point is we were not exposed to the ISB market or the international sovereign bond market, but we had a lot of domestic debts and foreign debts as well. So before 2008-9, it was more on the bilets and the multilets and the local debts. Now we have the international sovereign bonds. That's only different, but from a debt sustainability perspective, I'll take you through a little bit on that as well. Let me start with some of the numbers. So imports, as you can see very clearly, 2020 with a harsh import restriction from 19 to 20, you can clearly see the blue line in April, May. April is more of at that point, I think, the lockdown, and then we put import controls. You can clearly see a significant reduction in the imports as a result of that. You can't import cars and luxury goods, non-essential items. I think the government did a pretty good job by curtailing the imports and bringing the import value to something like 1.4 to 1.5 million dollars. It has gone up a little bit in the early part of this year. You can clearly see it's going to hitting 1.9 in March with the fuel price hike. And we also opened up for certain imports to revive certain sectors. But the import control journey had been a good journey for Sri Lanka, in my view. And it has really helped improving the current account deficit. I'll take you through. You can also see a slide graph on current account deficit as well. Again, on the export side, you have seen we're hitting the bottom. It's interesting that we hit a bad number in April in 2019 as well, thanks to Easter attacks. Again in April in 2020, we see because of lockdown and we bounce back. That's the thing about the exports. Like our infrastructure set up, the governance control, the people who are involved in the export sector. It's a well-run business, in my view. It's small, but it's good. So we've gone back to $1 billion of exports again very soon in July. Then it took a dip in October, November. I'm sure you remember the second wave. And again, it came back to a 900 plus in January. We hit $1 billion in March. Unfortunately, we had another lockdown again. I've not seen the April, May numbers. I'm sure it has come down, but it's not that bad. I'm sure it's not that bad because most of the export sector clients, one, they got permission to travel. Second thing, they all had playbooks for a COVID lockdown. They all executed the playbook. They were all ready for this. So they had buffer staff and all sorts of, very interesting arrangements to manage a COVID situation. I'm sure they've done a reasonable number. We'll see the numbers in a couple of weeks. So exports had been doing reasonably well. Then worker remittances is a really good story. Last year, we came close to 6% on worker remittances year-on-year growth. And when some of the organizations actually predicted the worker remittances to come down by 15-20%, we grew by 6%. And this year so far, we've grown by 20%, if I'm not mistaken. And holding on, which is again significant. Then the official reserves, you can clearly see it has come down because without tourism, you need to understand. So since March last year, our tourism numbers have pretty much come down to zero. We had few tourists coming in here and there, but the reality is our tourism numbers come down drastically. So that was a $3.6 billion economy before we closed the country. And just imagine, without the $3.6 billion, we've been settling $4 billion of debts. So last year we had to pay $4 billion. This year we have another $4 billion. We've been managing the debt situation without the tourism income. So of course the reserves have come down. Now, though it's $4 billion here, we also have a PBOC swap of about $1.5 billion, which we can use. There are other conversations on SDRs from IMF. That's about $800 million. And of course, there are specific bilets and multilateral commitments given. It's in the public domain. I don't want to go into details, but we are optimistic about the $1.5 billion of PBOC swap, as well as the $800 million of SDR. I think RBI also committed the swap line. So I think there are multiple arrangements to settle this year's debt. So if you go to the graph on the right bottom corner, you can see on the blue boxes, you can see the ISBs, international sovereign bonds. So we have $1 billion maturing in July. We are well set to settle that. We have another $1.5 billion next year. Part of this is in January, part of it is in June, July, and the first half we finish most of it. Then we have 1.25 in 2023, and 2024 we have a 2 billion. So these are the most crucial payments to stay stable as a country without going into a default. And we believe at Standard Chartered that short term we don't see a risk at all. By end of 2022, if we go on like this, there's a possibility of reserves coming down further. But we all know that from the data, when you see the data coming out of US and China, the travel will bounce back by early next year. So out of that $3.6 billion tourism economy, if you recover at least half of it, it's more than enough for us to settle the ISBs. Only thing we might have to, if there's a delay in tourism, we might have to continue the import restrictions for a while. I also want you to focus on the bottom middle graph where you look at the current account deficit. This is your imports, export, trade balance, your interest, and everything is in it. Basically, this is what we monitor from a debt sustainability perspective to see whether we are doing okay on the external side. You can clearly see improved current account deficit. And this year, if I'm not mistaken, we were predicting a positive current account deficit. Now our view is with the current lockdown that can be a bit challenging, but I think we've done significantly well from 2018 to now, narrowing down this current account deficit. So I mean, all in all, on the Sri Lanka story, I believe we have to stay on course. We are a twin deficit country, so we cannot expect miracles. We have to stay on course. We have to go with the import restrictions for a while. It has its pluses and minuses, but more pluses at this point. We have to work with the multilats and bilats to maybe manage some of the debts that we have, and of course get new funding as well without at this point at a CCC level going to the international sovereign bond market. So that's, and the government has sent a very clear message saying they don't want to get into new large debts, new debts. So I believe they have a way of managing. The one thing that we have not put a graph is the current account, the fiscal deficit. And as a country, we have taken a call to take the fiscal deficit to a 10% plus. Now, the global average on fiscal deficit this year, because the pandemic last year it was around 9% plus. So it's not an exception to see double-digit fiscal deficits after a pandemic. This is a 1 in 100 years event. I think what is important is stimulate the economies by activating industries like we have done so far. We've been basically doing the due payments for the construction sector, activating the construction sector. That creates a larger economy, the more people joining the workforce. So it stimulates the economy. Rather than just spreading, giving free money to people every month. I don't think Sri Lanka can go on like that while we do this distributing money during a lockdown. It's not something that any country can do on a long-term basis. But I believe that the central bank has very clear-cut policies to, stimulate the economy and pump liquidity into the right sectors. So it's not all gloom and doom. Very clearly we have a way of settling our debts. If this lockdown situation or the global situation goes beyond second half next year, we clearly see a risk, and it's very unlikely. And what we have seen is the only exception is actually India. India being a large country, the vaccination program is taking time. So India is set to vaccinate, I think, 40 to 50% of their population by end of this year. My best case scenario, 65% by Q1 next year. So once that is done, because these are big tourism corridors for us right now, even Sri Lanka is restricted in terms of travel to many destinations. But after India recovers, and China is already on a path to recover and recovered already, in my view, and growing. And both these markets are growing their GDPs at a significant level. And even with the pandemic, we believe India's GDP will grow above 8% this year. So with that, with US bouncing back, of course, there are challenges like GSP plus impacting the export sector, but I think we can compensate that by doing other things. And we believe that Sri Lanka had gone through many difficult situations before. By looking at the history and the track record, Sri Lanka will bounce back. So that's my sentiment, Rohanta, for the country, and we can get into more questions and things like that. I think I spent 30 minutes. We can get into Q&A and have an interactive session after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bingo. It was really nice. Let me. So, Bingo, we'll just discuss a few things on. Very interesting outlook, and something that really caught my eye was how Standard Chart is looking at the environment as a area of focus, and I mean that's really good, because we know that we need to increase our forest cover. We know that we have to make sure that we protect our environment. And I know that I serve on the National Olympic Committee also. We have taken a decision that we're going to make sure that when all athletes go to the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, that it will be a zero travel in terms of the carbon footprint. So there are a lot of companies who are now tied up, and they are saying we will sponsor the athlete, we'll sponsor 10,000 trees to be planted, and these trees are planted by Rotary in a given location with agricultural partner, where they maintain for 5 years the plantation that they have planted. And if there is a mortality rate of about 2%, which has been budgeted for, they replant. So it's not just like planting trees, but it's like to make sure that it's sustainable. So that was very nice. I mean, we always think of a bank as only financial objective driven, but when it's responsible for the environment, it just tells, that is the kind of route that all of us need to take. So there are a few questions that has come up. It says, first lockdown shocked Sri Lanka, but the third one, the response is different from the general public and the government sector. Do you see a difference from the finance institutions' perspective?
Yeah, so definitely the public, it was very different in the third lockdown. I think we are kind of used to the setup. So, compared to the first and the second wave, we saw more people were trying to come to the road and things like that. On the banking side, again, central bank activated the same moratorium process that we had before, very similar, not the same thing, but similar, basically giving guidelines to banks, saying one on the COVID loans that we are given, Saubhagya loans that we have given, to look at those, as well as any impacted individual or a corporate or an entity. So that has come already. We reached out to clients. So in terms of supporting clients, Rohant, I have not seen any difference. So we've stopped legal action and things like that during this time. In terms of support, I have not seen. But in terms of pumping liquidity, which we have done before, I don't think there's a need to do that. So central bank has done a lot of work in terms of bringing liquidity to the system, reducing SRR and things like that in the last, first and the second wave. But in terms of client response, and also clients are also ready this time. That's the feeling I get. Other than tourism, most of the clients are actually ready. So of course, there's an impact. There's an impact to a lot of the industries, no doubt about it. But it's very different to the last time. So they were getting ready for a third wave. So I believe the banks will play their role, and clients will have to reach out to the banks and discuss their facilities. Not to take this as an opportunity to, just prolong things. But if you can settle, you should settle. That's the expectation. I have not seen a big change in the approach from the banking sector.
Actually, even in the FMCG sector now, some of us serve on different capacities in fast-moving consumer goods companies. As at today, we see almost 45% of the redistribution target being achieved. which means that, though there's a lockdown, the supply chain is being maintained. People are more ready. They, even the retail outlets, there's a way in which they're serving the communities. And so I suppose, we got to balance between keeping the economy alive, and then of course to make sure that the people are protected.
Absolutely.
Because how do you see the global environment evolving? We know that vaccination has a very strong correlation to economies opening up. The other day we were watching the French Open, and it was so lovely to see, how people were enjoying. And you sometimes wonder, is there a chance when you also can, be part of that kind of audience? So how do you see the global economy evolving?
Yeah,
Because you all see.
the first thing is vaccination is the way to go. Wherever they have delivered the second vaccine, we see a very different behavior in those markets. So very clearly, with the vaccination being available, I think now the predictions are the global population to be vaccinated in the next 9 months. You can see an active participation from the OECD markets as well as from China, India, all of these countries. Markets will bounce back. But we see in US very clearly, people walk without a mask. It's back to normal in New York. Trevor Noah, like you correctly said, so on the tennis side, Trevor Noah is back touring. People are waiting to go and see those shows and join and get into a plane. I think people are tired being in a lockdown. So there'll be a surge. Our expectation is wrong. There'll be a surge of tourists rushing into our markets. There's a surge of people buying stuff. We've seen the pent-up demand in the US. It's just exponential in our view. So it's just a matter of time. And if you go back to the history, during the Spanish flu, everything changed after 2.5, 3 years. People thought, it's all gloom and doom, but people started buying more stuff after 2.5, 3 years, and you ended up with a great, stock market crisis in 10 years. So due to consumerism. So we believe that the markets will mid next year, markets will bounce back in a big way. It'll start with US, China. Yeah.
How do you see Sri Lanka evolving, Bingu? In this backdrop, we are faced with a very challenging environment. How do you see?
So Sri Lanka, again, the vaccination program, right? So we believe that we can vaccinate the eligible population by November, completely done by November. And we have money to import the vaccines. We have a lot of bilateral support also from bilateral organizations to refinance some of those transactions. So we are of the view that we can bring the required amount of vaccines in very fast and vaccinate. And as a country, we have a lot of centers to vaccinate people as well. So our infrastructure is much better than a lot of the emerging markets. So we believe if that is done by November, sky is the limit, Rohan. December, Sri Lankans will come back home because a lot of Sri Lankans are waiting to come back home. There's a large diaspora living outside. And then the tourists will start to come in at the latter part of the season. Unfortunately, we will not be able to tap the full season, but we believe January, February, flights will be full, people will come back, and we will bounce back.
So what do you think of the debt tourism, or the debt due to the tourism stock that most banks have? And we are challenged right now with it. Do you feel that that will ease out?
Yeah, so our recommendation was, we discussed this at some point, to create a bad bank and take some of these toxic assets under a bad bank and manage it. That's one recommendation. But I have not seen that happening. The other option is to go on with the moratorium until they recover. See, the thing is, banks have to be patient in this scenario. So you can't expect, if there's no cash flow, you can't settle. So what's the point of acquiring these properties? What do you do with all these hotels? So I think we have to be patient, continue the moratoriums until you see flows coming in. And some businesses might divest. Some companies might think we want to exit our tourism portfolio. It's a good opportunity for some of the other companies to buy those portfolios. So all those things will happen. I think on the client side also, they also should come to a conclusion in terms of managing some of their toxic assets, toxic businesses. If it's not working for a particular company, it's time to exit. Time to give it to a company that have got the bandwidth to manage those without holding on to everything. So we expect that to happen, as we've already seen. People are moving away, divesting and moving away to other areas. There are so many lucrative businesses to do in Sri Lanka. If you got a portfolio that you cannot manage. But tourism is the future, Rohan, no doubt about it. So after March, you will see a surge of tourists coming in, as well as more investors investing in the tourism business.
I mean, I'm actually so happy, Bingu, that we had you in today's show, because I mean, things are so gloom. It's great to see someone with responsibility and who see the global market giving an overview to Sri Lanka in this manner. I mean, sorry, just personally speaking, what made you get into banking, Bingu? I mean, did you, when from school ages, did you say that you want to be a banker, or how did it go?
So it's funny that you asked this question. My father was a banker, so I had a little bit of an idea in terms of what banking is and how it works. I only remembered him going to work in the morning and coming in the night, and he was always tired. So I never wanted to become a banker. Rohan. That was not in the cards. So it was more like an arranged marriage. So after A levels, I was waiting for 2 years to get into the university. I did bioscience, and during that time, I thought I should, join some company and make some money. So I decided to join Ceylon Bank. That was the easiest choice at that point. And then I liked, and when the cutoff came also, I was like 3 marks below the cutoff line. I had to appeal, and I didn't want to go through that process. And I settled down in the banks. Within 1 year, I got settled, and I liked the business. Like means I kind of accepted it as a job, but it took a while for me to settle down. I would say at least a good 10 years to accept banking as a career.
So what was your ambition?
Then it was like, I mean, if you become a branch manager or a regional manager, you look at those, seniors and think, okay, this is something that you should aspire to be. So at that point, CEO, becoming a CEO was not in the plan.
If you didn't pick up banking, Bingu, what was the career that you were thinking when you got your A-level results? And obviously, it was good for you to almost like push for university. I mean, what at that time, what was the career you had in mind?
So it was more on the bioscience side. I was looking at things like microbiology. At that point, there was a degree in Calania. Then agriculture was an area of interest, as well as bio and chemistry. Those are the areas I was looking at, genetic engineering and things like that. So it was more on the bio side than anything else. Not into commerce. I've never done commerce in my life, for that matter. During my school time and for O levels, I did motor mechanism. So the demand and supply is something that I learned, economics and commerce and monetary theory, after joining the bank.
So, I mean, majority of your success story has come overseas, working in Mauritius, working in Africa. And I mean, do you regret coming to Sri Lanka?
No, never, Hunter. But every time you come back home, I come back home twice. You have this shock when you come back home, because you're outside, you live as an expat, and you come back home, you're back to basics, and you have to then embrace the local culture and the challenges and the obligations around it. Because as an expat, you generally have a very, I would say, calm life, because your weekends are free for yourself and for your family. When you come to Sri Lanka, it's a bit of a rush. There's so many friends and family and a lot of events. But I love the local culture, and every time I come back home in 6 months, I'm like, I don't want to go back again. And it's happened twice that I went back again, but this time I think I'm here for good.
You must
at
have
least
enjoyed.
for some time. Yeah.
But you must have enjoyed Tanzania, I'm sure.
I did. So I'm also into wildlife a little bit. So I've spent a lot of time with my family, camping out, going around, going to those islands like Zanzibar, then going to markets like Kenya. Then while in Mauritius, I had the opportunity of working in South Africa for a while, and looking after Zimbabwe in a very difficult time on the transaction banking business. So that was an experience. Going to Zimbabwe itself was an experience, and working in Zimbabwe also was interesting. So all in all, Africa, I don't know, I feel home when I go there. It's a different feeling for me when I go to Africa. I can anytime go and work and settle. But Sri Lanka is home end of the day. So I'm fully settled now.
But Bingu, tell me honestly, since you have seen, I mean, I also love wildlife, and I've done the African in Kenya and also Tanzania. I yet feel that Sri Lankan wildlife is much, much more exciting. What do you think?
I would say it's different. So if you are looking at a density, you can't beat a Masai Mara or a Serengeti or even Ngorongoro for that matter. Because Ngorongoro in like a 16,000 square kilometer crater, you get everything in that crater when you go down. Whereas if you want to see Asian elephant, sloth bear, leopard, I think Sri Lanka is the way to go. And again, Sri Lanka wildlife parks are small, very small in my view. So it's in an hour or two, you basically see in the Sri Lanka's top 3, top 4. So that's an opportunity in Sri Lanka, I believe, and you can go to a wildlife park in like 4 hours drive, 3 hours drive, which you can't do in Africa. I mean, from Dar es Salaam to Arusha is like 800 kilometers. So from there, another day you have to plan for the tour. So it's difficult. So Sri Lanka has a massive opportunity from that perspective. And even after going to so many parks in Africa, I did about 5, if I'm not mistaken, I've never seen a leopard. So seeing a leopard in Africa is difficult, though it's part of the big 5. So that's the opportunity for Sri Lanka. Sloth bear and the leopard in my view. And the Asian elephant, our elephant is also different. It's a subspecies, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So what is your advice, Bingu, for a youngster doing an MBA?
First thing is, Rohan, that you should not rush into MBA. So they should take a break after the first degree and work at least for 2 to 3 years and get some work experience and then get into the MBA, because MBA is your final thing until you do a doctorate at some point. So when you do the MBA, you should be in a position to contribute to your groups as well. Should not be like, I'm a young guy who wants to do stuff and complete my education. Especially MBA, MSc, sometimes you do it soon after the degree because you don't want to lose touch on the technical aspect. That's the first thing. The second thing, see, you're exploring careers, have an open mind, because jobs can change. Your core subject, your majors can be on anything. You end up doing something else. So be agile, have an open mind, and have that transdisciplinary thinking, so you can move from one area to the other and work with multiple disciplines and shift disciplines as well. I think that having that flexibility is critical. You cannot say I've done this particular subject and I can only do that. Gone are the days. Your syllabus, when you start a degree, I'm talking about the first degree, what you learn in the first year can change completely when you do the finals. It has gone to that level. The world is changing so fast. So what you learn become irrelevant in 3-4 years. Some of the things. So it's a ever-changing world. So you have to be flexible to grab those opportunities. And one last thing, Rohanta, just to make sure that you be yourself and you don't try to follow different personalities and try to be somebody else. So having that authenticity and authentic leadership is also critical, and follow your passion and align your skill to the passion and do something that you like to do in life.
So if we go back to Bingumal at 19 years, is there anything that you might tell young Bingumal to do or not to do?
Interesting one. Rather, I believe I wish I knew that the world wouldn't revolve around you at that point, which I thought that the world revolves around you. So at 19, you're very hyper. You think like everything is centered around you. So I wish I knew that. That's the only thing. And I knew a little bit about spirituality and the spiritual path, which I didn't know until I came to a certain age. And with that thing, you do so many things at the age of 19. I don't want to go into that long list of misbehaviors, but yeah.
My last question to you is that sometimes we get very comfortable in a culture, and then sometimes your boss calls you. I remember when I was at Rekit, my boss called and said, okay, now I want you to go and work in another market, and sometimes it kind of creates a bit of an imbalance. But then you realize that when you go and work in another market and you learn to get adjusted to those variables, and then later on in your life, when you come back and you reflect, you realize that those experiences and the challenges you take As soon as when you are very comfortable, they pick you and put you to another market. So which sometimes people don't do this. They like to stay focused, be comfortable with the family life cycles, the networks, and everything gets broken. Now, since you are in the global platform and you've been continuously taking opportunities from Mauritius to the African and now come back to Sri Lanka, uh, what is your advice to a youngster who has to take this challenge of breaking away through these networks, and do you think it really helps your future career?
Yeah, it does, Rohan. I mean, in a big way. I mean, any market for that matter. If you only worked in the US or in UK or in India, you're like a frog in a well. You have to move out to some market to understand how other cultures work. So in that moving part, there are so many things that you have to do. First of all, taking that risk is very critical. So if you're thinking that job to be permanent, or can I get a permanent job in a place like in Mauritius or in Kenya or in South Africa, there's nothing permanent in life. So you can't have stability. You have to take challenges and go, and then you figure it out. Coming back can be an option. From there, you move to another market in a multinational. That's a risk that you take. So you have to be a risk taker, first of all. Second piece is, when you go, it's important that you understand the cross-cultural element. So we generally go through something called the culture shock in the first 6 months, all of us, when you go to a new market, no matter how sophisticated the market is. It can be the US, it can be Australia, but there's this thing called the culture shock. So I was fortunate from the bank, like we were given cross-culture training and language training as well every time we move. So entire family would get culture training for that matter. So I strongly advise youngsters, if they're looking at a market, like do some amount of study, some amount of research on culture. So there is a site called Hofstede. So Hofstede has culture calculator and a culture comparison. So they look at things like masculinity, the few areas that they look at, hierarchical culture and things like that. If you understand the culture and go through Hofstede and do a culture comparison with Sri Lanka, we say Nigeria, then you very clearly see what the cultural difference is and how to fit into that culture. And you have to align. You cannot say, oh, this is how I worked in Sri Lanka and I want to do my Sri Lanka's number in Nigeria. It doesn't work. But having said that, when you are brought in as an expat, you're also supposed to drive a global agenda. So you can't be too much of a local. So you have to strike a balance.
So what next, Bingu? Are you looking at doing I'm not asking you to do recommending a PhD, but are you interested in doing a doctoral, a DBA or something? I mean, have you ever thought about it?
I did, rather funny that you asked me. I registered for one as well and I stopped it. See that right now, I mean, we are in a pandemic, and for the next 1.5 years, we'll be working really hard to come out of this, locally as well as globally. So it's a lot of work, and I don't want to do it for the sake of doing it. If I want to do something because I did my MBA research on emotional intelligence, I properly spend time, doing interviews and all of that. I did a lot of work on, so it was a qualitative research that I did. So qualitative data analysis was very difficult. So I would like to do something similar, taking a lot of time. And it's definitely not in the cards for the next 3 years. So maybe later I might do it, might not do it. I'm not a big believer. I mean, when it comes to that, I prioritize work first, Rohan. So even my MBAs I did at a latter stage. My CIMA also I did at a latter stage.
Oh, so yeah. I mean, it just shows the ethic, the work ethic you have, and the lesson for us the discussion that I just picked up from you, Bingu, is how you got into a career by accident, but then how you focused onto it, and now of course you've gone global and you've come back to give leadership to the Sri Lankan business, which is like fantastic. It's really lovely chatting with you, and thank you so much for taking time to have a chat with our MBA graduates, Bingumal. And I'd like to wish you all the very best. And Kaushali, over to you.
Thanks for having me, Rohanta. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kaushali?
Thank you, Doctor. Indeed, such a wonderful discussion, especially focused on the purpose and what exactly you can do to live your purpose, and how exactly you can look at adjusting your life when you really have to. Thank you so much, Mr. Bingumal, for sharing your thoughts. And most importantly, it's amazing to see how you have inspired our young lives and looking at undergraduate to postgraduate paths, getting into the profession that they believe that they would get in, but just again go through changes just like you did. So thank you so much for sharing this time with us today. And while thanking you, thank you for the audience who have come on board with us. And this comes to an end of another session. And we would meet back again in another session in this series of meeting an expert, and rather meeting a CEO. Until then, good night and take care of you.